On March 28, 2026, before the sun even came up, thousands of people were already standing in line outside a funeral home in Suzhou, China. They carried white chrysanthemums. Some had driven through the night from provinces hundreds of miles away. One driver later said he spent 5 minutes just trying to pass the queue and still couldn't see where it ended. Across the country, strangers were ordering flowers online and having them delivered by food delivery riders. Notes on the bouquets read things like, "Teacher Zhang, safe travels. I hope there's no overtime in heaven." The man they came for wasn't a celebrity, wasn't a war hero. He was a 41-year-old exam tutor or in college application advisor, probably the most divisive figure in Chinese education in the last decade. A man who once told parents, on a live stream watched by millions, that if their kid wanted to study journalism, they should knock him unconscious and sign him up for something else.
别报新闻，好吗？你随便，我就这么跟你说吧，你闭着眼睛，你就拿中国本科专业目录里边，你闭着眼睛摸一个都比新闻好。别报新闻，好吧？我是家长的话，这孩子非要报新闻学，我一定会干一个事儿，就是把他打晕。光给他一拳，让他昏死过去，然后的话给他报一个别的。
When I first heard that, I was genuinely shocked. And I'm guessing most of you have rarely heard a teacher talk like that either. This is one of the things that made him so controversial. He used extreme aggressive language to push his views. In the age of the internet, that kind of rhetoric is very good at getting attention. We'll get into that more later. He also had an 11-year-old daughter. She replied to a condolence video online. She said, "Thank you, Uncle. My dad was great. They said a star appeared in the sky and it was my dad." In Chinese culture, there's an old belief that when a great scholar dies, they become a star that lights the way for others. That's how an 11-year-old made sense of losing her father. So who was Teacher Zhang? And why did over 10,000 people show up to mourn one of the most controversial teachers in the country? His name is Zhang Xuefeng. He came from an ordinary family in a poor county in northeast China. Not elite, not connected. Something happened in college that left a deep mark on him. His Gaokao score was 488. The Gaokao is China's national college entrance examination. His roommate from another province scored over 120 points higher. Yet they ended up in the same university, the same major, sitting in the same classroom. The only difference was where they took the exam. Different provinces, wildly different cutoff scores, same ability, same destination, but one kid had to fight 120 points harder just because of where he was born. That stayed with him. That shaped everything he did. He believed the Gaokao was the single most important crossroads in an ordinary person's life. And he believed most families were walking into it blind. In 2016, he posted a 7-minute video breaking down China's top 34 universities. It went mega viral. Millions watched. Overnight, he became the loudest, most blunt voice on university admissions in the country. Within a few years, he'd amassed over 60 million followers across all platforms and launched his own company to turn that influence into a business. His company didn't sell tutoring. It sold Gaokao application strategy. For viewers unfamiliar with China, this part needs a little explanation. In China, students cannot simply apply to many universities and then choose from the offers later. After the Gaokao, they must submit a ranked list of universities and majors in advance, and the system admits them based on both their score and that ranking. In other words, one bad choice can lock them out of better options. Zhang's team helped families decide how to rank those choices, where to aim, what to avoid, and how to turn one exam score into the best possible result. The basic package cost about $1,800. The premium version, including 4 years of follow-up and graduate school guidance, ran around $2,600. For a comfortable family in Shanghai, that was already a heavy expense. For a rural family, it could equal several months of household income, and people paid it. During peak Gaokao season, his products sold out in hours. At one point, he brought in $27 million in a single afternoon. Brands lined up to sponsor him. His live appearances commanded fees most TV hosts would envy. He wasn't just an educator anymore. He was in industry, but he also put a significant cut of profits into scholarships, supporting over 1,200 kids who couldn't afford his services. But just as his career reached its peak, it all came to a sudden end. By his 40s, he was running multiple companies, live streaming constantly, working at a pace that worried everyone around him. In June 2023, he was hospitalized. Chest tightness, heart palpitations, exhaustion. Doctors told him to slow down. He didn't. He once said, "My wish for my next life is to not have to be such a responsible person." March 24th, 2026, 12:26 p.m. He collapsed after running on a treadmill in his office gym. By 3:50 p.m., he was pronounced dead, cardiac arrest, 41 years old. That morning, he'd been on a live stream, doing what he always did, answering questions from parents, helping families figure out which schools to aim for, which majors to avoid, still working. Nobody knew it was a goodbye. His courses were expensive, so why did so many people pay? Education anxiety. Think about the last time you heard a parent worry about their kid's future. Maybe it was about college tuition, maybe picking the right degree, maybe just the quiet fear that their child would end up worse off than they were. That fear exists everywhere, and that's not just a Chinese problem. In the U.S., student loan debt has crossed $1.7 trillion. In the UK, young people are asking if a degree is worth it when house prices are 12 times the average salary. In parts of Europe, youth unemployment sits above 20%, degree or not. The anxiety is universal. What changes is how it's structured and who gets hurt most. In East Asia, it gets compressed into a single point, one exam, one moment. Your entire life hinges on it. In South Korea, they call it entrance exam hell. Every November, the country goes silent. Flights rerouted, construction stopped, police escorting late students, families spend billions on cram schools, students study 14 to 18 hours a day. 75% of graduates end up working in fields unrelated to their major. In Japan, it's examination hell. Failed students become ronin, spending years resitting. 60% of middle schoolers attend private tutoring. But nowhere is this more extreme than China. Over 10 million students. One test, one shot. Big city families can manage. Rural families like Zhang's walk through a minefield blind. That's what he built his business on. He turned invisible data into advice any parent could understand. But he wasn't selling education. He was selling information the system should have provided for free. And that's where the debate begins. His most famous line, 2023, about journalism. If my kid wanted to study journalism, I'd knock him unconscious and sign him up for something else. Pick anything with your eyes closed. It'll be better than journalism. Professors published furious rebuttals. A former journalist wrote in his eulogy that the comment offended him professionally, but privately he admitted there was truth in it. That tension, between the insult and the honesty, is what made Zhang so polarizing. He went further. All liberal arts are the service industry. One word, grovel.
普通家庭女孩成绩一般，不要报金融啊。
He warned, don't study finance without connections. He coined the 4 Pitfall Majors: biology, chemistry, environmental science, materials science. After he named the Pitfall Majors, application rates dropped 12%. Practical majors saw cutoffs rise 8 points. Educators called it the Zhang effect. His line, first earn the right to choose, then talk about what to choose. Critics said he reduced education to a transaction. Defenders said that's what education already is when you can't afford to get it wrong. Then came his biggest failure. In 2020, he pushed civil engineering hard. China's real estate was booming, looked like a sure thing. Then the market collapsed. Students who listened graduated into a frozen industry. Social media exploded. I listened to Zhang and my life is ruined. Meanwhile, his Pitfall Majors saw rise in demand as the country invested in biotech and new energy. This exposed the flaw. He used today's market to predict tomorrow's. Industries cycle. An 18-year-old's choice needs 4 years to pay off. Nobody can see that far. Later, his remarks triggered massive public controversy. He issued a public apology over his extreme comments and has since maintained that every subject is equally valuable. I don't think his later change of tone was a sincere change of heart. It looked more like a compromise under public pressure. His core beliefs never really shifted. He still believed computer science had the best job prospects. He still believed ordinary kids should study technical fields. He still preached that children from ordinary families had no choice but to grind. Suffer hard at the start, he'd say, and you'll get what you want later. Whether there's truth to that is debatable, but his theory doesn't apply to everyone. Not every kid thrives under that pressure. Not every family's circumstances fit into a spreadsheet. And reducing someone's entire future to which major pays the most at graduation is, at the very least, an incomplete picture. The question is the same everywhere. Is the only path to a good life a university degree? The Gaokao is called the fairest path to class mobility in China. Same exam for everyone. No legacy admissions, no donor seats. Pure meritocracy in theory. But in practice, it's far from equal. Different provinces use different exam papers. Cutoff scores vary wildly from region to region. Remember Zhang's college roommate? Scored 120 points higher, yet they ended up in the same school, same major, same classroom. The only difference was which province they sat the exam in. Where you're born matters just as much as how hard you study, and beyond the score, the real maze begins. Which major, which university, what the job market looks like in 4 years. For families without connections or insider knowledge, these decisions are made almost blindly. That's the void Zhang stepped into. Whether you call it utilitarian education or stigmatizing certain majors, he hit a nerve. He tapped directly into the deepest anxiety Chinese parents carry. The fear that their child's one shot at a better life could be wasted by a single wrong choice. And if that level of parental anxiety sounds extreme, it's worth understanding how deep it runs. In 2011, Amy Chua, a Yale law professor, published Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. It became a global sensation. Chua described raising her daughters with rules most Western parents would find unthinkable. No sleepovers, no playdates, no grade below an A, hours of piano and violin every day. She argued this was the Chinese way, driven by a belief that the highest form of love is preparing your child to succeed, even if it means pushing them to tears. The book was polarizing, but it captured something real. In Chinese culture, a child's academic success isn't just personal, it's a family project. The payoff for decades of sacrifice. When stakes are that high, someone like Zhang doesn't just offer advice, he offers relief. Someone who finally says out loud what every anxious parent is thinking but afraid to ask. When a society's most important educational decisions need a paid subscription to an internet personality, that's not a success story. Zhang didn't create education anxiety. Education anxiety created Zhang. On one hand, he really did help millions of families who had nowhere else to turn. He took a complicated admission system and turned it into something ordinary people could actually understand, helping to narrow the information gap in a very real way. On the other hand, his model was fundamentally flawed. He used snapshots of today's market to make absolute claims about tomorrow's. The civil engineering disaster proved that. His rhetoric stigmatized entire fields, and his influence was so large that it physically moved application numbers nationwide. That's enormous power for one person to hold over millions of 18-year-olds making the biggest decision of their lives. And charging thousands for information that should have been free raises its own questions. His supporters and his critics will never agree, and maybe they don't need to. The 10,000 people at his funeral represent one side of that divide. They came not because he was perfect, but because in a system that ignored them, he was the one who showed up. He once said that when he dies, every platform would have a trending topic. Teacher Zhang is dead. He said maybe he'd become a memory for an entire generation. He was right about that. He called himself a street lamp. Maybe not warm enough to hold your hand, but bright enough to show you where the road was. That lamp went out at 41. But whether the road he lit was really the right road, each family has to decide on its own. So now I want to ask you, do you feel this kind of education anxiety today? Do families still need a mentor like him? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.